Husband kicked out his sick wife after she needed surgery. Unaware she was heiress to $500 million inheritance. He threw her out when her body failed her, calling her a burden unworthy of his love. Then drove away with Fiona, the same friend who once stood beside Evelyn in a bridesmaid's gown, promising to protect their union. He never knew the frail woman he cast aside carried a fortune that could change generations. "You expect me to waste my youth waiting for a sick woman to recover? Evelyn, I'm done watching you fall apart. Pack your things and get out of my life." Those were the venomous words Daniel Brooks spat as Evelyn stood trembling, her hospital bracelet still around her wrist, pain and disbelief burning through her weak body. Instead of offering care, he offered cruelty. Instead of love, he delivered humiliation and rejection in the hour she needed him most. He believed her story had ended, but what he never imagined was that the same woman he tossed out like broken glass would rise from that pain, uncover the power he tried to bury, and return as the calm storm that would shatter his pride and expose his lies. Sometimes the woman you abandon in sickness becomes the very hand of your downfall. Sometimes the tears you ignore water the garden of your own destruction. This is not just another story of betrayal. It is the cry of a wife discarded in her weakest moment, the transformation of pain into strength, and the warning life gives to every heartless soul. Never despise the weak, for they may rise higher than you could ever dream. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. As we step into this story, I ask from my heart, don't just hear her pain and scroll away. Subscribe now, and in the comments, share where you're watching from. So Evelyn and every woman betrayed in her darkest hour knows she is not alone. The front gate slammed so hard it rattled the windows. Evelyn Brooks stumbled onto the porch, her hospital files clutched to her chest. Her voice trembled. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this inside." But Daniel Brooks stood tall in the driveway, his anger boiling over. His black SUV idled behind him, headlights glaring like witnesses to his cruelty. Beside him stood Fiona Clark, her best friend turned silent shadow. Perfectly dressed, eyes filled with smug pity. Daniel pointed toward the door. "There's nothing to talk about, Evelyn. You're a sick woman who refuses to get better. I'm done watching you bleed me dry." Evelyn's lips quivered. "I just needed your help with the surgery. I thought—" "You thought wrong," he barked, snatching the envelope from his coat pocket. "Here, your freedom." He threw it at her feet. She bent down slowly, her weak knees trembling as she picked it up. Her heart cracked when she read the word, divorce. The housekeeper froze by the doorway, torn between fear and pity. Evelyn's eyes darted toward Fiona, hoping for a sliver of humanity. "Fiona, you were my friend." Fiona's painted lips curved into a faint smirk. "I was, until you started ruining his life with your drama." Daniel's voice thundered again. "You're not dying here, Evelyn, not in my house. You want surgery? Go find someone else to pity you." He stormed inside, yanking her suitcase from the hallway. Dresses, framed photos, and medicine bottles tumbled onto the wet pavement as he hurled her belongings one by one. "Take your sickness with you." Rain began to fall, cold and sharp. Evelyn tried to steady herself, tears mixing with the storm. "Daniel, you promised to love me in sickness and in health." He paused at the door, his face dark with disgust. "I lied." Then he turned to Fiona and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go, babe." The car door slammed. The engine roared. Evelyn stood alone in the rain, surrounded by shattered pieces of her life. Her wedding photo floated face down in a puddle, the ink bleeding away like a memory she could never erase. As thunder rolled overhead, Evelyn whispered, "Maybe losing everything is how I'll find myself again." And as the taillights disappeared down the street, a faint shadow watched from across the road. A neighbor named Dr. Stella Ken, who would soon change everything. The rain refused to stop. Evelyn Brooks dragged her soaked suitcase along the cracked sidewalk, every step heavier than the last. Her pale face glistened with tears and rainwater. Cars passed by, splashing muddy water against her skirt, but none slowed down. Her own home now felt like a stranger's house. The divorce papers still clutched tightly in her trembling hand. A sharp horn blared as a taxi swerved close. "Watch where you're going, lady," the driver shouted before speeding off. Evelyn stumbled, her knees scraping the pavement. Pain shot through her leg, but she bit her lip and forced herself up. "I have to keep moving," she whispered, her voice lost in the storm. Her body was weak from the illness that had nearly taken her life. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but there was no strength left to cry. Streetlights flickered above, casting ghostly shadows on the puddles. A mother hurried her child across the street, avoiding Evelyn's eyes as if suffering were contagious. Evelyn reached a small bus shelter and sank onto the cold bench. The world moved on around her, laughter from a cafe, music from a bar. Life continued, but not for her. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the dull ache of exhaustion. "Maybe Daniel was right," she whispered. "Maybe I really am nothing." Just then, a soft voice broke through the rain. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Evelyn blinked through the blur. A woman in a nurse's uniform knelt before her, shielding her with a hospital umbrella. Her name tag read Clara Mensa. Her eyes were warm, filled with quiet concern. "You shouldn't be out here in this condition," Clara said gently. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Evelyn tried to protest, but her body swayed. Clara caught her just before she collapsed, wrapping her coat around her shoulders. As Clara helped her into a waiting cab, Evelyn's consciousness faded. Through the haze, she heard Clara murmuring to the driver, "Take us to Dr. Stella Ken's house. She'll know what to do." Before darkness fully claimed her, Evelyn managed a weak whisper. "Why? Are you helping me?" Clara smiled faintly. "Because someday someone helped me too." The car disappeared into the rainy night, and inside that quiet home waiting ahead, a new chapter of Evelyn's destiny was about to begin. Evelyn woke up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if she had been running through her nightmares. The room around her was unfamiliar, small, warm, and softly lit. The scent of lavender filled the air. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming, until a gentle voice said, "Easy now. You're safe." Standing beside her was Dr. Stella Ken, a calm woman in her early 40s with deep brown skin and kind eyes that carried both warmth and wisdom. She wore a loose cardigan and a stethoscope around her neck. "You fainted last night," Stella said, offering a glass of water. "Clara, the nurse who found you, brought you here. I'm her neighbor, and a doctor." Evelyn took the glass, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to trouble anyone," she whispered. "You didn't," Stella replied softly. "You were just in trouble." She pulled up a chair, her voice calm but firm. "I've seen women like you, strong until they have nothing left to hold on to. You don't have to pretend to be okay here." Evelyn tried to smile, but tears rolled down her cheeks. "My husband threw me out. I have no family to go to." Stella sighed deeply, her gaze lowering. "I know how that feels." Her eyes darkened with memory. "My late husband. He was Daniel's mentor. I once thought loyalty could heal pride. I was wrong." Evelyn's breath caught. "You knew Daniel?" "I did," Stella said, her tone thoughtful. "He was brilliant once, until ambition devoured his heart." She reached for a folded towel and placed it in Evelyn's hand. "Don't waste your strength hating him. Use it to rebuild yourself." The words landed heavy but healing. Evelyn wiped her tears, a small flicker of strength returning to her voice. "How?" "I have nothing left." Stella smiled gently. "Then we start from there. Sometimes nothing is exactly where rebirth begins." A faint ray of sunlight filtered through the curtains, touching Evelyn's face. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. Outside the room, Clara peeked in quietly, relief softening her face. Stella turned toward her. "Clara, we'll need some documents." She mentioned surgery. Evelyn froze at the word surgery. Her eyes widened, heartbeat quickening. Something inside told her this was not the last time that word would change her life. The loud knock startled Evelyn from her rest. She opened the door and froze. Standing there in a perfectly pressed suit and pearls that glimmered under the morning sun was Grace Callahan, her mother. Her posture was regal, her smile rehearsed, but her eyes carried the same cold calculation Evelyn remembered since childhood. "Evelyn," Grace said smoothly, stepping inside without invitation. You look terrible. What have you done to yourself? Evelyn stiffened, clutching her robe tighter. Mother, how did you find me? Daniel told me, Grace replied, setting her handbag on the table as if she owned the place. He's worried about you. Evelyn's chest tightened. Worried? He threw me out. Grace sighed as though speaking to a stubborn child. Marriage isn't easy. You embarrassed him, Evelyn. Men don't stay when women become burdens. You should have handled this privately. Each word cut like glass. Stella, overhearing from the kitchen, paused mid-step. She didn't interrupt. Not yet. Grace opened her handbag and pulled out a stack of documents. These are guardianship papers. Temporary control of your accounts until you recover. It's for your safety. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Guardianship? Grace smiled faintly. Just until you're stable. I'll make sure your bills are paid and no one takes advantage of you. But something about her tone felt wrong. Practiced, hollow. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. She froze when she saw Daniel's signature at the bottom corner. He already signed this? Grace's voice hardened. Because he cares. Sign it, Evelyn. Don't make things harder. Before Evelyn could reply, Stella entered the room, calm but firm. She won't be signing anything today, Mrs. Callahan. Grace turned sharply. And who are you? Someone who believes love doesn't need legal permission, Stella said quietly. Evelyn's hands shook. For the first time, she looked her mother in the eye. I'm not signing. The silence stretched. Grace's face fell, pride bruised. You'll regret this. She gathered her bag, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she stormed out. Evelyn sank onto the couch, trembling. But something within her had shifted. For the first time, she had said no. Stella placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You just opened the first door to freedom, she whispered. But Evelyn didn't know. That very signature she refused would soon return, forged under her name. Evelyn's body slammed hard against the floor. The chair had slipped beneath her during physical therapy. Don't move, the therapist shouted, rushing forward. But Evelyn was already pushing herself up, jaw clenched, sweat rolling down her temple. Her body ached, but she refused to give up. I'm fine, she said through gritted teeth. Again. The therapist hesitated, seeing the fire in her eyes. Stella watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet pride softening her expression. You're stronger than you think, Evelyn, she said gently. But strength isn't just in muscles. It's in refusing to let pain define you. Evelyn steadied herself on the parallel bars, her reflection staring back from the mirror. The woman looking at her no longer resembled the broken figure Daniel had thrown into the rain. Her shoulders straightened. Her breath steadied. She took another slow, deliberate step, and another. Hours later, she sat by the window, notebook open on her lap. The sunlight painted her face gold. Her handwriting trembled at first but grew firmer as she wrote, Pain is not the end. It is the proof that I'm still alive. Her words gave her peace. She began spending her evenings helping Stella organize files from her clinic, reading old case studies, and asking questions. You're learning fast, Stella said one night. You ever thought about studying finance or management? Evelyn smiled faintly. No, but maybe I should. I need to understand how to stand on my own. In the quiet hours, she watched online lectures about personal finance and women's independence. The numbers, charts, and stories of other survivors lit a new spark inside her. Knowledge became her medicine, a slow healing that rebuilt more than her body. Weeks passed, and her reflection no longer frightened her. The weakness in her eyes had been replaced by purpose. Every step she took, every word she read, pulled her further away from the woman Daniel tried to destroy. Stella placed a cup of tea beside her. I don't know what life has ahead for you, Evelyn, but I believe it's something greater than pain. Evelyn smiled, fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Maybe life is giving me a second chance. But before she could take another sip, the sound of the doorbell broke the calm. Stella turned toward it. Outside stood a man in a gray suit, holding an envelope sealed with a family crest. A letter that would change everything. The knock came again, firm, deliberate, and unsettlingly official. Evelyn hesitated before opening the door. A tall man in a gray suit stood outside, rain dripping from his umbrella. His voice was calm but carried authority. Mrs. Brooks, my name is Richard Hale. I'm an attorney representing the late Margaret Callahan, your aunt. Evelyn blinked, stunned. My aunt? I haven't heard that name in years. Richard handed her a sealed envelope embossed with an old family crest. She left specific instructions for me to deliver this in person, only to you. Evelyn slowly tore it open. Inside lay a handwritten letter and a formal document stamped with gold seals. Her hands shook as she read, "To my niece Evelyn, the only one who ever loved without condition. You are now the sole heir to my estate and the controlling shareholder of Callahan Holdings. Use it not for pride, but for purpose." Her breath caught. This can't be real. It's very real, Richard said gently. You've inherited $500 million in assets and controlling shares. Your aunt placed them in a trust for you, protected from any spouse or family interference. Stella, standing nearby, covered her mouth in shock. Evelyn, that means that I'm not powerless anymore, Evelyn whispered, tears blurring her vision. For months she had felt invisible, discarded. Now destiny had handed her the weapon she never asked for, but desperately needed. Control. Before she could process it all, another knock interrupted. The door creaked open. Grace Callahan stood there, smiling too widely. I heard some wonderful news, she said, stepping inside uninvited. Her eyes glimmered with greed. Darling, this could be overwhelming for you. Let me handle the business side, at least until you recover. Evelyn met her gaze with quiet steel. No, Mother. This time I'll handle my life myself. Grace's smile faltered. Don't be foolish. Money changes people. Then maybe it's time it changes me, Evelyn replied calmly. Richard nodded approvingly, placing a folder on the table. Mrs. Brooks, when you're ready, there's one more thing you should see. Your aunt left. A second letter about your husband. The room fell silent. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. About Daniel? Richard's eyes met hers. Yes, and it may explain everything. The headline hit the morning papers like fire. Businessman Daniel Brooks abandoned his wife during illness. Sources say she ran away after wasting family funds. Daniel sat in his luxurious office, smirking as he read the article. Fiona leaned on his shoulder, swirling her wine. See? The world believes you. Poor Evelyn looks like the crazy one now, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Daniel's grin widened. Good. Let them pity her. She'll stay forgotten. He tossed the paper aside, his ego glowing brighter than his suit. But miles away, in Stella's small apartment, Evelyn held the same paper with trembling fingers. Her heart ached at the lie printed in bold ink. She ran away. That wasn't the truth. She had been thrown away. Her reflection stared back from the window, fragile yet fierce. Let them talk, she whispered. I don't need to defend myself. Time will. Stella entered quietly, handing her a cup of tea. The world can be cruel, Evelyn. It celebrates power and mocks pain. But silence has its own power. It makes people wonder. Evelyn nodded slowly. Maybe silence is my armor now. Later that day, she walked through the market alone, hood drawn over her head. Whispered voices followed her. That's her, Daniel's wife. She wasted his money. She looks too healthy for a sick woman. Each word pierced her heart, but she didn't look back. Instead, she helped an old vendor lift a fallen basket. The woman smiled gratefully. Thank you, child. Not everyone stops to help anymore. That small moment reminded Evelyn who she truly was. Not Daniel's burden, not a headline, but a human being capable of kindness even when the world had none for her. That night she wrote in her journal, I will not explain myself to those who never cared. Let them believe what they wish. One day truth will speak louder than rumor. As she placed the pen down, a faint sound buzzed from her phone. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. Mrs. Brooks, we need to meet. It concerns your late aunt's company and your husband. R.H. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Richard Hale. She didn't know it yet, but this message would lead her straight into the world Daniel thought she could never enter. His world of power, deceit, and secrets. The flash of cameras filled the grand hall as the guests turned toward the staircase. Daniel Brooks descended in a custom black tuxedo, his arm proudly wrapped around Fiona Clark, glowing in a red silk gown. Laughter and whispers rippled through the crowd, a celebration of success, reputation, and lies. At the top of the stage, the banner read, "Brooks and Clark Charity Gala for Women's Health." The irony stung. The same man who threw his sick wife into the streets was now pretending to save other women. "Daniel, you're incredible," Fiona whispered as she posed for another photo. "The press adores you." "They've forgotten all about her." Daniel smirked, raising his glass. "Let them. Evelyn's just a name buried in my past." But across the room, under soft lighting, Evelyn Brooks stood quietly, unrecognizable. Her black evening dress was simple but elegant, her posture calm and graceful. She had been invited as a sponsor under her aunt's company, Callahan Holdings. None of them knew she now owned it. Her eyes found Daniel on stage, basking in attention. He laughed loudly, his arrogance filling the room. Fiona leaned in close and whispered something in his ear, and they both laughed harder. Evelyn's heart clenched, but her face stayed still. This was no longer the woman he humiliated. This was the woman learning patience. A host took the microphone. "Tonight, we celebrate generosity. A special thanks to our major sponsors, Callahan Holdings, for their unexpected but generous donation." Daniel froze mid-sip. Fiona's smile flickered. Callahan Holdings. Evelyn slowly stepped forward and handed the signed check to the host. "It's our pleasure to support this cause," she said softly, her voice steady, her presence commanding. For a second, Daniel's eyes met hers, and confusion clouded his face, then anger, then fear. Evelyn simply smiled and walked past him, her perfume lingering like quiet victory. Behind her, Fiona hissed under her breath. Was that really her? Daniel's jaw tightened. If she's back, she's making a mistake. But Evelyn didn't look back. As she exited the hall, the applause thundered. Not for him, but for the woman he thought was gone forever. Outside, her phone buzzed again. A message from Richard Hale read, "The donation was perfect. Now we move to phase 2, investigation." Evelyn glanced at the moonlit sky and whispered, "It begins." The door to the private office slammed shut. Marcus Kane, Daniel's longtime business partner, paced the room, his forehead beaded with sweat. "Daniel, this can't continue. The numbers don't add up. You've been pulling funds from multiple accounts, one of them under your wife's old name." Daniel leaned back in his chair, calm but dangerous. "Relax, Marcus. It's called creative accounting. No one will find out." Marcus rubbed his temples. "You don't get it. I've seen that name on official documents. Evelyn Brooks. If anyone traces it, it links back to Callahan Holdings." Daniel froze. His voice dropped to a whisper. "How do you know about that?" "I manage the books, Daniel." "I know everything," Marcus said, lowering his tone. "And if this explodes, I'm not going down with you." Daniel stood up sharply, slamming his fist on the desk. "You'll keep your mouth shut if you value your job." But miles away, in a quiet office at Richard Hale's firm, Evelyn sat with her eyes glued to the same ledgers Marcus was panicking over. Her expression was calm, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Richard flipped another page. "He's been using your medical records to create fake transactions. Surgery receipts, hospital grants, and invoices under your name. The fraud is extensive." Evelyn's heart pounded. "So the signature he used..." Richard nodded gravely. "Yes, the same one he signed on your discharge papers. Scene 1. It's identical." Evelyn exhaled shakily, realization hitting hard. The papers that threw her out of his life were now the same papers that could destroy his. Marcus's name appeared on the last page, his signature shaky. "He's involved," Evelyn murmured. "Partly," Richard replied, "but he's cracking. I can see it in how he's moving the accounts. He'll talk soon." Evelyn stood, her reflection in the window glowing faintly with moonlight. "Then let's give him a reason to." She opened her notebook, the same one she once used to write about pain, now filled with evidence, dates, and calculations. Her silence had become her weapon, her patience her armor. Richard watched her, half in awe. You're not fighting like a victim, Evelyn. She smiled faintly. Because I'm not one anymore. A phone rang on Richard's desk. He picked it up, eyes narrowing. It's Marcus. He wants to meet, but he's not alone. Evelyn's calm expression didn't waver. Then it's time. Outside, thunder rolled, and somewhere across the city, Daniel's empire began to crack. The sound of breaking glass echoed through Daniel's mansion. You cheated on me, Fiona, he roared, slamming his hand against the marble counter. Fiona stood her ground, her face unreadable. You think you own me, Daniel? You used me to climb higher. Now it's your turn to fall. Daniel's rage flared. Who is he? She smiled coldly. Someone richer, smarter, and less desperate. She grabbed her purse and turned toward the door. You've been losing investors for months. Did you really think no one would notice your fake charity funds? Daniel froze. What did you say? Marcus talked, Fiona said with a wicked grin. You trusted the wrong people. Daniel's jaw clenched. You're lying. Am I? She dropped a folder on the counter. Inside were copies of his own forged signatures, the ones tied to the Callahan Holdings accounts. These came from a source I met at your gala. Someone who's been watching you? Daniel's face drained of color. Evelyn, Fiona's laugh sliced through the air. Yes, your perfect little ex-wife. She's back, and she's smarter than you ever gave her credit for. Daniel lunged forward, but Fiona stepped back. Careful, she warned. If anything happens to me, these documents go straight to the authorities. She walked out, slamming the door behind her, heels clicking like a countdown. Daniel stood trembling, sweat dripping down his temple. His phone buzzed, an email notification from Marcus. We need to talk. I have something that can save us both. Meet at 9 p.m. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn sat in Richard Hale's office as Marcus slid a flash drive across the desk. His hands shook. I want out. I didn't mean for this to go so far. Daniel forced me. Evelyn stared at him, voice calm. You didn't need to help him forge my name. Marcus swallowed hard. I know. That's why I'm helping you now. These files prove every crime. The charity thefts, the offshore accounts, everything. Richard took the drive carefully. We'll need to move fast. Evelyn nodded, her voice steady but filled with quiet fire. He's about to lose everything he built on my pain. Outside, lightning flashed through the dark sky, casting shadows on Evelyn's face. Richard looked at her and said, Tomorrow's board meeting, that's where it ends. Evelyn's reply was soft but chilling. No, Richard, that's where it begins. Who authorized this meeting? Daniel barked as he stormed into the glass-walled boardroom of Brooks Enterprises. The room fell silent. Executives exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something powerful was about to happen. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Evelyn Brooks, poised, calm, and radiant in a navy suit. For a moment, Daniel froze. He thought he was seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? He hissed, his voice cracking with disbelief. Evelyn looked up, her tone steady and cold. You called for a financial review. I'm here as the new majority shareholder of Callahan Holdings and your largest investor. Murmurs filled the room. Daniel's jaw dropped. That's impossible. Callahan Holdings belongs to me, Evelyn interrupted. It always did. She placed a folder before her, sliding copies of verified ownership documents across the table. The Callahan family crest gleamed at the top of each page. My late aunt left everything in my name, including the shares you illegally transferred into your charity funds. Daniel's face went pale. You're bluffing. Richard Hale, seated beside her, adjusted his glasses. We've already traced the money trail, Mr. Brooks. The offshore accounts, the forged receipts, all led back to you. Daniel's temper exploded. You set me up. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Daniel. You set yourself up the day you signed my name on that hospital discharge paper. The executives gasped. Daniel's hand trembled. He looked around, but every face had turned cold. The man who once commanded respect now looked cornered and desperate. Evelyn, please, he stammered. We can fix this together. I made mistakes, but... She stood, gathering the documents. You made choices, and this is their cost. Security entered quietly, waiting for her signal. Daniel's eyes widened. You can't do this to me. I built this company. Evelyn paused at the doorway, her expression unreadable. No, you built your empire on my silence. I'm just reclaiming what was mine. As she walked out, Daniel's voice cracked behind her. Evelyn, don't do this. She didn't turn around. The elevator doors closed, her reflection fading against the mirrored walls. Outside, Richard met her gaze. You've won today. Evelyn looked ahead, her tone calm but distant. No, Richard. Today was justice. Tomorrow will be freedom. Far away, a familiar voice was dialing a number. Grace Callahan. And her words would reopen wounds Evelyn thought were finally healed. The glass door flew open, hitting the wall with a sharp crack. Grace Callahan stormed into Evelyn's office, her perfume arriving before her words. So it's true, she hissed, slamming a folded newspaper on the desk. The headline screamed, Evelyn Brooks takes control. Husband exposed in corporate fraud. You've humiliated this family, Grace's voice thundered. You should have handled this quietly, not on national television. Evelyn didn't look up immediately. She finished signing the last document before speaking in a calm, measured tone. Mother, I didn't humiliate the family. I exposed corruption. Grace scoffed. Corruption? Daniel was your husband. You destroy a man, and you call it justice? Evelyn stood, her expression calm but unyielding. He destroyed himself. I only told the truth. Grace's face twisted in disbelief. Listen to yourself. You sound just like your aunt. Self-righteous and ungrateful. That's why I warned her not to spoil you with those inheritance dreams. Evelyn's body stiffened. You knew. Grace froze, realizing her slip. I only wanted to protect you. No, Evelyn said softly. You wanted to control me. You've been doing it my whole life, teaching me to stay quiet, to obey, to endure. Her voice trembled but didn't break. But not anymore. Grace's tone softened, false sweetness creeping back. Evelyn, don't let pride blind you. Think of our name, our status. Our name means nothing if it stands for silence, Evelyn interrupted. And I won't live my life in the shadow of your fear. Grace reached out. You'll regret this defiance. I'm your mother. Evelyn stepped back. A mother protects, not manipulates. She removed the gold ring from her finger, the one Grace gave her on her wedding day. Take it back. I'm done carrying your expectations. Grace's face crumbled, a mix of fury and shock. You're turning your back on your blood? Evelyn met her gaze, calm and final. I'm freeing myself from it. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace's heels clicked sharply as she turned and stormed out, the door closing like the end of an era. Evelyn stood alone, breathing deeply. For the first time, she felt light, truly free. Her phone buzzed. A notification appeared from Alex Reed, the journalist who once mocked her. I have evidence Daniel's empire is collapsing. Are you ready to make it public? Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Yes, she whispered. It's time the world sees who he really is. The blaring sirens shattered the morning calm outside Brooks Enterprises. Reporters swarmed the main entrance, cameras flashing as officers led Daniel Brooks through the crowd in handcuffs. Mr. Brooks, is it true you embezzled millions from your own charity? One shouted. Daniel's eyes darted wildly, sweat glistening on his forehead. This is a mistake. My wife set me up. But no one believed him. The world that once praised him was now watching him drown. Inside the newsroom, Alex Reed, the journalist who once published the cruel headlines about Evelyn, sat at his desk staring at a new article draft. His voice was low, remorseful. I got it wrong the first time, he told his editor. This woman didn't run away. She was thrown away. His editor raised a brow. You're really sure about this? Alex nodded. 100%. Evelyn Brooks didn't just survive. She exposed the man who destroyed her. The editor leaned forward. Then write it like redemption. Hours later, the headline spread across every screen. Evelyn Brooks, the woman who brought down $1 billion betrayal. The article painted her as a symbol of strength and justice, the voice of every woman silenced by humiliation. In her office, Evelyn read the piece quietly. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then a small, peaceful smile crossed her face. "He tried to erase me," she murmured, "but truth writes its own ending." Fiona Clark, alone in her apartment, threw her phone across the room as the same article flashed across her screen. The investor she betrayed Daniel for had cut ties, her accounts frozen, her calls unanswered. "They're all gone," she whispered, staring at her reflection. A woman once beautiful, now haunted. "He used me, and I used him, and now we're both ruined." Meanwhile, in a cold holding cell, Daniel sat on the edge of his cot, head in his hands. The sound of the cell door clanging shut echoed like judgment. His empire, his pride, his power, all gone. Evelyn stood by her office window, city lights glimmering beneath her. "The truth always comes back," she whispered. Just then, her assistant entered. "Ma'am, the invitation for the charity gala has arrived. They want you to give the keynote speech." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then it's time the world hears everything." But outside, unseen in the shadows, a familiar figure watched her car drive away. Daniel Brooks, newly released on bail. The grand ballroom of the Royal Meridian Hotel buzzed with journalists, investors, and public figures. Cameras flashed, capturing every shimmer of elegance and wealth. But all the lights seemed to converge on one person, Evelyn Brooks, standing tall at the podium, calm and radiant in a white gown. The charity gala was meant to honor leaders of integrity, but tonight it would witness something far greater: justice. The host introduced her, voice trembling with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, philanthropist, survivor, and founder of the Callahan Foundation." The applause thundered. Evelyn smiled faintly, but her heart pounded with steady purpose. She placed a single folder on the podium and began, her voice clear. "Integrity is not built by power or wealth. It's proven when truth stands against deceit." The crowd listened intently as she continued. "Months ago, I was cast aside, called a burden, and left to die. Tonight, I stand not for revenge, but for truth." A murmur spread through the room. On the screen behind her, projected documents appeared. Transaction trails, forged medical receipts, charity thefts, all bearing Daniel Brooks's signature. Gasps filled the hall. The ballroom doors burst open. Daniel stormed in, his suit rumpled, his eyes wild. "Stop this nonsense," he shouted, his voice cracking through the silence. "She's lying. That's not my signature." Evelyn turned calmly, her tone steady but sharp. "Really, Daniel? Because this signature is the same one you used to throw me out of your home. Remember the hospital papers?" The audience froze. Daniel's face went pale, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Reporters lifted cameras. The truth had finally cornered him. Evelyn stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "You once said I was nothing without you, but tonight, Daniel, you are nothing without the lies that built you." Security moved toward him. Flashes erupted from cameras and the crowd erupted in whispers. Daniel shouted in panic, "Evelyn, please, don't do this." She paused, her expression unreadable. "I already did." The room fell into complete silence as Daniel was escorted out, his head hanging low. Evelyn turned back to the crowd. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance." As the applause rose again, Evelyn's eyes softened, yet deep inside she felt an ache, a quiet longing for peace she still hadn't found. Backstage, Richard Hale approached with a smile. "It's over." Evelyn looked toward the lights. "No," she whispered, "it's just beginning." Outside, the first dawn light touched the horizon, and with it, a new foundation was about to be born. The sun blazed over the new Callahan Women's Health Foundation as ribbons fluttered in the morning wind. Cameras flashed, children laughed, and a crowd gathered to witness the grand opening. The sign above the entrance gleamed proudly. Founded by Evelyn Brooks. Inside the courtyard, Evelyn stood before the microphone, elegant in a soft lavender dress. Her voice carried across the field. "This foundation isn't built from revenge or wealth. It's built from pain turned into purpose. Every woman here deserves a voice and a second chance." Applause rippled through the crowd, but behind her calm smile, Evelyn's eyes softened when she spotted familiar faces. Clara Mensah, the nurse who once found her in the rain, now stood among the volunteers wearing the foundation's badge. Dr. Stella Ken, her rescuer and mentor, sat proudly in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. Richard Hale stood nearby, watching quietly, the man who had guided her through justice to peace. After the ribbon cutting, Evelyn walked through the hallway where portraits of strong women lined the walls. One photo stopped her. It was of her late aunt, Margaret Callahan, smiling beside a quote, "True wealth is the difference you make when the world forgets you." Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. You saw the woman I would become before I did." Suddenly, murmurs rippled through the crowd outside. A figure stumbled toward the gate, unshaven, trembling, eyes hollow. Daniel Brooks. His once impeccable suit was worn and torn, his pride replaced by desperation. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice cracking. "Please, I've lost everything. I have no one. Help me." The cameras turned toward him. Silence fell. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking on the marble. Daniel knelt before her, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong. I don't want forgiveness. I just need mercy." Evelyn's expression was calm, not cruel. "Daniel, mercy was always yours to give. You only learned its value after you destroyed it." He lowered his head, broken. She turned to the press. "Kindness is not weakness. Sometimes walking away is the strongest act of love." Applause rose again, soft but powerful. As the crowd cheered, a young boy handed her a drawing, a woman holding the sun, with the words, "You make people strong again." Evelyn smiled through tears. She looked up at the sky. "This isn't the end," she whispered. "It's the beginning of something greater." And somewhere in the distance, another woman, abandoned, afraid, unseen, took her first brave step toward a new beginning. Husband divorced his barren wife after her IVF failed, unaware of her $30 million fortune. He divorced her after years of failed IVF treatments, calling her useless and unworthy of his name, then walked back into the arms of Sophia, the same friend who once stood by Grace's side during every injection, and whispered, "I'll always be here for you." He never knew Grace carried a fortune that could change generations. "Enough, Grace. You're nothing but a barren burden. Pack your things and leave. I refuse to waste my life on a woman who cannot give me a child." Those were the venomous words David Williams spat as Grace stood trembling in the courtroom, divorce papers forced into her hands, her dreams collapsing around her. Instead of defending her, he abandoned her. Instead of love, he delivered shame in the hour she needed him most. He believed she was finished, but what he never imagined was that the same woman he cast aside as worthless would rise with a power beyond his reach, a rise that would expose his betrayal, shatter his pride, and bring him to his knees. Sometimes the children you cannot bear become the vision that bursts nations. Sometimes the woman you treat as nothing becomes the storm that destroys your empire. This is not just another story of betrayal. It is the cry of a wife despised in her weakest moment, the scars of humiliation turned into strength, and the warning the world too often forgets. Never despise the broken, for they may rise higher than you could ever dream. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. As we step into this story, I ask from my heart, don't just hear her pain and scroll away. Subscribe now, and in the comments share where you're watching from. So Grace, and every woman betrayed, knows she is not alone. The sharp crack of glass shattering echoed through the living room. Grace Williams flinched as David hurled her favorite photo frame against the wall, the one that held their wedding picture. The glass rained down across the floor, a cruel reflection of the years already broken between them. "You've drained every cent on those useless treatments, Grace," David's voice thundered, his eyes burning with rage. 4 cycles of IVF. 4! And what do we have to show for it? Nothing. Grace's hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her faded cardigan. The bruises under her eyes told the story of endless hospital visits, hormone injections, and sleepless nights. She had sold her jewelry, emptied their savings, even pawned her late mother's necklace, all for the dream of holding a child in her arms. Still, every pregnancy test mocked her with a single empty line. Dr. Helen Carter, their fertility specialist, had warned them gently in the last appointment. It may not be Grace alone. Mr. Williams, we should consider testing your fertility as well. Sometimes the issue, but David cut her off with a bitter laugh. Are you saying I'm the problem? Don't be ridiculous. Look at her. She's weak. Barren. The word barren sliced through Grace like a blade. She lowered her head, her lips parting in a whisper no one could hear. I tried, David. I gave everything. It wasn't just David's voice tearing her down. His father, Edward Williams, a stern patriarch with silver hair and a heart carved from stone, had made his judgment weeks earlier. You are nothing but a barren burden to my son, he declared coldly at the dinner table, the clink of cutlery falling silent. A Williams legacy cannot end with emptiness. David, you must think of the family name. The neighbors had picked up the whispers too. Evelyn Scott, the woman next door, often watched Grace from her porch with folded arms, muttering to her friends, "Poor thing, cursed from birth. She'll never give him a child." And through it all, Grace still clung to hope. She prayed quietly at night, begging God for a miracle, even as her body ached from needles and her spirit sagged under ridicule. She remembered one night sitting on the cold bathroom tiles staring at another negative test, while Sophia Turner, her closest friend, held her hand. Sophia's voice had been soft then, almost like a lullaby. Don't give up, Grace. You're stronger than you think, and no matter what happens, I'll always be here. But now, as the glass shards glittered on the floor and David's fury shook the house, Grace realized her sacrifices had only carved deeper cracks in their marriage. Her lips quivered, her eyes brimming with tears. David, please, don't give up on us. He looked at her with disgust. Us? There is no us without a child. He turned away, his footsteps heavy, his silence heavier. And in the shadowed corner of the room, unseen by Grace, Sophia's text message flashed on David's phone. She doesn't deserve you. You need someone who can give you what you want. Grace didn't know it yet, but while she was fighting for her family, betrayal was already planting its first poisonous seeds. The one person Grace thought she could trust, her best friend, was about to become the sharpest knife in her back. The perfume hit her before the sight did. Grace froze in the hospital corridor as David leaned a little too close to Sophia Turner, her lifelong best friend. Sophia's laugh rang out, light and musical, her manicured hand brushing his arm as if she had every right to touch him. David, Grace called softly, her voice raw from another round of tests. He straightened immediately, guilt flashing in his eyes before vanishing into coldness. Sophia, quick as lightning, wrapped her arm around Grace's shoulders, pulling her close. Grace, there you are. You look so pale. Are you sure you're eating enough? I told you I'll always be here for you. The warmth in Sophia's voice would have fooled anyone else. But Grace noticed the way Sophia's eyes lingered on David a heartbeat too long. Inside, Grace's heart thudded. A friend shouldn't touch her husband like that. A friend shouldn't look at him like that. Still, she forced a smile, whispering to herself, "She's my sister in spirit. She would never hurt me." But she was wrong. Later that evening, Sophia sat in her lavish apartment across town, sipping wine as her friend Lydia Harris lounged on the couch. Lydia, bold, sharp-tongued, and hungry for scandal, grinned knowingly. You're wasting your time pretending to be her shoulder to cry on. Everyone knows David's losing patience. Be smart, Sophia. Step in before someone else does. You'll be the true mother of his children. Sophia tilted her glass, watching the red liquid swirl. She's my best friend, Lydia. Best friend? Lydia scoffed. Grace is barren, and you know it. David deserves a woman who can give him what he wants. Why should you stay in the shadows when you could have his name, his wealth, his life? The words sank deep, awakening something in Sophia that she had buried under years of smiling loyalty. She had always admired David's charm, his success, his power. And now, with every failed IVF attempt, Grace's world was crumbling, while Sophia's chance was rising. That same night, Grace sat alone in her quiet bedroom, scrolling through her phone. Old photos of her and Sophia, laughing in college, celebrating birthdays, standing side by side in wedding gowns, stared back at her. Her heart softened. She is all I have left. Surely she would never betray me. But while Grace whispered prayers of gratitude for her friend, Sophia was already typing a different kind of prayer into her phone. David, you deserve better. She can't give you what you need, but I can. The message hovered unsent for a moment. Then Sophia pressed send. Miles away, David stared at the glowing screen in silence. His lips curled into a faint smile. Grace stirred restlessly in her sleep, unaware that the woman she trusted most had just opened the door to the betrayal that would shatter her world. Soon whispers would turn into public daggers, and the humiliation Grace feared most would not come in secret. It would strike at a crowded family table. The sound of a fist slamming the dinner table silenced every fork and knife. "You'll never give me a child, Grace," David roared, his face flushed red with fury. The crystal glasses trembled from the impact. The family dinner had begun politely enough. Laughter, toasts, chatter about business. But the moment Grace reached for David's hand under the table, his patience snapped like brittle glass. Around the table, faces froze. Edward Williams, the stern father-in-law, leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into approval. "Finally, my son speaks the truth," he said coldly. "The Williams name will not be buried by a barren woman." The words hit Grace like thunder in her chest. Her fork slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the porcelain plate. Sophia, seated across the table in her elegant dress, placed a hand dramatically on her chest. Her eyes widened in false shock, but her lips fought to suppress a smirk. Beside her, Lydia Harris whispered something under her breath and stifled a laugh. Grace's vision blurred with tears as she looked around the table for one kind face. None came. Evelyn Scott, the nosy neighbor invited to dinner as a family friend, shook her head with a mocking sigh. "I told everyone in the neighborhood, didn't I? Poor thing can't give him children. What a curse." Grace's heart twisted. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them about the endless injections, the sleepless nights, the way she had begged God to fill her empty womb. She wanted to shout the truth. "It's not all my fault. The doctor said David might be part of the problem too." But her lips stayed frozen. Speaking would only bring more shame. She stared down at her plate, her appetite gone, the roasted chicken and wine blurring together. In her silence, memories rose. Pawning her jewelry, signing over her savings. The bruises on her arms from IVF needles. She had carried the weight of hope alone, only to be called useless in front of everyone. Her heart whispered, "Why does love vanish when you are at your weakest?" The dinner continued without her. Laughter returned, now at her expense. Edward raised his glass in a toast. To the future, one not held back by burdens. The words cut deep, but worse was David's silence. He didn't defend her. He didn't even look at her. Grace stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stumbled from the dining hall. Her chest heaved, her heart breaking with every step. Sophia's eyes followed her, a sly satisfaction hiding behind a mask of concern. She leaned toward David and whispered just low enough, "She'll never give you what you want." "You deserve more." David's jaw tightened. His hand brushed hers beneath the tablecloth. And as Grace collapsed against the cold tiles of the bathroom down the hall, muffling her sobs into her sleeve, the first whispers of betrayal began to take form. Not in shadows this time, but in public daylight. Soon whispers would no longer be whispers. A secret hand on the street, a shared laugh in the open. The betrayal was about to step into the light. The cafe erupted with gasps. Grace stood frozen on the sidewalk, her eyes wide as she stared through the glass window. There, in full daylight, David sat with Sophia, his hand resting boldly on hers across the table. They were laughing, leaning close as though no one else existed. Grace's breath hitched in her throat. It wasn't a rumor this time. It wasn't a whisper in a corner or a mocking laugh at dinner. This was betrayal, painted on the canvas of the open street. Inside the cafe, Victor Brooks, David's slick business partner with a love for drama, spotted Grace outside. He raised his cappuccino cup with a grin. "Finally, David," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you found a real woman who can give you heirs." The whole cafe turned to look. Sophia feigned surprise, but she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, her smile grew, smug and confident, as though she had won a prize. Grace's knees buckled. She clutched her bag tighter, her heart pounding. The world tilted. This was the same Sophia who had held her during her IVF tears, the same friend who promised, "I'll always be here." And now here she was, not as a friend, but as a thief of everything Grace held dear. Ruth Miller, Grace's quiet caregiver, who had followed her into town for errands, caught her arm just before she collapsed. Ruth's face, always calm, tightened with sorrow. "Come on, Grace," she whispered gently. "Don't let them see you fall here." But Evelyn Scott, the neighbor who thrived on gossip, had already seen enough. Standing near the bus stop, she cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, "I knew it! Your husband's found a new wife already." Her laugh echoed as people gathered, pointing and whispering. Grace's cheeks burned. She wanted to scream, to storm inside, to demand an answer. But the weight of humiliation pressed her down harder than chains. Instead, she let Ruth guide her away, her tears blinding the path beneath her feet. Back home, Grace curled on the couch, staring blankly at the empty cradle in the corner of her bedroom, the one David had bought during their first IVF attempt. "For the baby we'll welcome," he had said. Now it mocked her, a hollow emblem of promises broken. She whispered to herself, "Why wasn't I enough? Why did love vanish so easily?" And while she wept, David and Sophia walked out of the cafe arm in arm, their laughter carrying into the afternoon sun. David didn't know it yet, but the first open betrayal had been witnessed not just by Grace, but by dozens of eyes. Eyes that would carry the story into every corner of their city. The betrayal wouldn't remain gossip for long. Soon it would march into the courtroom, and divorce papers would slam down like a final nail in Grace's coffin. The gavel slammed down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Judge Harrison's voice cut the air. "Case number 2745, Williams versus Williams. Divorce petition granted." The words stabbed into Grace's chest like knives. She stood trembling before the judge's bench, her palms cold, the blood draining from her face. David Williams, once her husband, shoved a thick stack of divorce papers across the polished table. His eyes burned with contempt. "It's over, Grace. You are nothing but a barren shadow clinging to my name." Across the room, Sophia Turner sat smugly in the back row, a silk scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. She didn't hide her smirk as Grace's humiliation unfolded in public. Beside her, Edward Williams, the iron-faced father-in-law, nodded in satisfaction. "Finally, my son is free," he muttered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Grace's legs nearly gave way. Her voice cracked. "David, please, after everything, after the sacrifices." But David didn't flinch. "Sacrifices? You drained our money chasing empty dreams. I need an heir, Grace. You gave me nothing." The courtroom spectators murmured, gossip passing from lip to lip. Some looked at Grace with pity, others with scorn. Evelyn Scott, who had somehow secured a front row seat, leaned toward her friend and whispered with a mocking grin, "See? Even the law can't save her." Margaret Cole, the poised lawyer assigned to oversee the estate later, sat quietly in the corner, observing. Her sharp eyes softened briefly as they fell on Grace. Though her official role had not yet been revealed, she knew this broken woman's story was far from finished. As Judge Harrison stamped the decree, Grace's tears fell freely. The echo of the gavel marked the burial of her marriage, her dignity, and her years of sacrifice. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions about David's future, Sophia's involvement, and Grace's humiliation. David pulled Sophia close, flaunting her on his arm. "This is the woman who will give me the future Grace could not," he declared proudly. Grace froze on the courthouse steps, her body shaking as the whispers swirled. How could the man who once promised forever turn me into a spectacle? Ruth Miller, her quiet caregiver, pressed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Hold on, Grace, don't break here. Not in front of them." But as Grace looked at Sophia's triumphant face, Edward's approving grin, and David's arm wrapped around the woman who had been her closest friend, her heart cracked once more. Her lips trembled as she whispered to herself, "I've lost everything." Yet somewhere deep inside, a faint flicker of defiance stirred. Because what Grace did not know was that her story was not ending. It was only shifting. Alone and disgraced, Grace would soon find herself drowning in silence, mocked by neighbors, abandoned by family, and left with nothing but despair. But in that darkness, the first light of her destiny was preparing to break through. The door slammed shut behind her with a hollow boom, echoing through the empty house like a cruel reminder. Grace Williams stumbled into the silence of her once lively home, clutching the divorce decree in her shaking hand. The papers slipped to the floor, fluttering like ashes. Ashes of a marriage burned to nothing. She collapsed onto the rug, her sobs breaking through the stillness. The laughter that once filled these walls was gone. The cradle in the corner mocked her again, its polished wood shining under the weak sunlight. It had never held a baby, only dust and broken dreams. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it with trembling fingers, only to see a new message from her estranged cousin, Deborah Clark. David was right. Maybe if you had been stronger, things would have been different. Stop bringing shame to the family. The words stabbed deeper than any blade. Even her own blood turned against her. Grace threw the phone aside, curling into herself. She remembered the court, the flash of cameras, the whispers of neighbors. She remembered Edward's satisfied smirk, Sophia's triumphant eyes, David's cruel dismissal. The memory replayed until she thought she might lose her mind. The knock at the door startled her. Ruth Miller, her caregiver and only steady supporter, slipped inside with a quiet step. Ruth was in her 50s, plain in appearance but strong in heart. She carried a pot of warm soup and placed it gently on the table. "Eat something, Grace," Ruth urged softly. "Don't let their cruelty starve you." But Grace only shook her head, tears spilling anew. "Ruth, they've all turned on me. Even Deborah, even the neighbors. I am erased. Nothing but the barren wife he cast aside." Ruth's eyes shone with quiet sorrow. She pulled a blanket over Grace's trembling shoulders, whispering, "You are not erased. They don't see the end from the beginning. One day, Grace, they'll eat their words." But Grace could not hear hope through her pain. She closed her eyes, her mind drowning in darkness. Outside, Evelyn Scott's voice carried from her porch, loud enough for Grace to hear through the open window. "Poor Grace, left with nothing. David made the right choice. She'll never rise again." The neighbors laughed with her, cruel echoes in the night. Grace pressed her hands over her ears, wishing the world would vanish. Hours passed in silence until she dragged herself to her room. The mirror caught her reflection. Hollow cheeks, swollen eyes, a woman unrecognizable. She whispered through cracked lips, "Who am I now? If I am not a wife, not a mother, then what?" Her knees buckled and she crumpled by the empty cradle, clutching its wooden edge as though it could anchor her. Her sobs shook the room. And then, a letter slid quietly under the front door, a cream envelope with her name written in elegant script. Grace didn't notice it yet, but that letter carried the key to her rebirth, a voice from the past waiting to lift her from the ashes. What seemed like the end was about to reveal a hidden beginning, a letter of destiny written long before Grace's fall. The pound, pound, pound on the door jolted Grace awake. She staggered from the floor, still wrapped in the blanket Ruth had left, her eyes swollen from crying all night. When she opened the door, a sharply dressed woman in a navy suit stood waiting, a leather briefcase in hand. "Grace Williams?" the woman asked, her voice firm but calm. Grace nodded, unsure. "I'm Margaret Cole, lawyer for the estate of Lillian Reed, your late aunt." Margaret extended an envelope sealed in red wax. "This belongs to you, and you must read it alone." Grace blinked in shock. Aunt Lillian, the same woman who had once called her a disgrace for not producing children? The same aunt who vanished from family gatherings years ago? She could hardly breathe as she took the heavy envelope into her trembling hands. Margaret's eyes softened. "Your aunt had a sharp tongue, but don't mistake that for a lack of care. She left behind something you must know." With that, Margaret and her young law clerk, Daniel Reed, stepped back, leaving Grace in the doorway, with the weight of mystery pressed against her chest. Inside, Grace tore open the seal. A letter unfolded, written in delicate cursive. My dear Grace, years ago, I judged you harshly, as others have. For that I am sorry. I too lived childless, and I know the pain of whispers, the sting of rejection. But I also know this truth. A woman's worth is not in her womb, but in her will. I leave you $30 million, not to flaunt, not to waste, but to rebuild your dignity. Use it to stand tall again and to help women like you. Women the world calls barren, women broken by cruel words. This is my legacy to you. Carry it with strength. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled freely, but these were not the tears of despair she had cried the night before. These tears carried shock, relief, and a spark of new purpose. She whispered, 30 million? Her voice shook, the number too large to believe. Margaret returned inside with Daniel, explaining, the funds are secure, confidential, but you must guard the secret. If your ex-husband learns of it, he will come crawling back, not for you, but for the money. Daniel, the young law clerk with sharp eyes and a brotherly smile, added, we'll help you keep this hidden until you're ready to act. But promise us, Grace, don't let your past chain you. Use this to build your future. Grace's heart pounded. The same house that had echoed with humiliation last night now vibrated with hope. She clutched the letter to her chest, hearing her aunt's words echo. A woman's worth is not in her womb, but in her will. And yet in that very moment, a shadow crossed her mind. If David ever discovered this secret, he would not just beg for her return, he would destroy her all over again. Grace stood tall, the letter trembling in her hand. She was no longer just the barren wife cast aside. She was something else, something stronger, but destiny had only just knocked. Her next step would test whether she could rise beyond pain into purpose. With wealth in her hands and dignity stirring, Grace's quiet rebuilding would soon begin. But the louder David flaunted his new life with Sophia, the more their paths were bound to clash again. The pen scratched across the paper with fierce determination. Grace sat at her kitchen table, blueprints and notes scattered everywhere. Her hands shook not from weakness, but from passion. The passion to build something new. Her aunt's words rang in her ears. A woman's worth is not in her womb, but in her will. Foundation for Childless Women, she wrote across the top of the page. The title alone sent shivers down her spine. For the first time in years, her tears were not of pain, but of purpose. Miriam James entered quietly, her arms full of fresh files. She was Grace's old college friend who had resurfaced after hearing of her divorce. Once forgotten in the whirl of life, Miriam returned now with the kind of loyalty Grace thought she had lost forever. You're really doing this, Miriam said softly, laying the files down. Not for revenge, not to prove them wrong, but to help women who went through what you did. Grace smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. If my story can heal one broken woman, then all the nights of needles and tears were not wasted. In the corner, Ruth Miller busied herself with tea, her steady hands moving with quiet loyalty. She looked at Grace with pride, though she said little, the way she always did. Dr. Helen Carter arrived shortly after, carrying a thick medical report. The fertility specialist who had once been ignored now offered her expertise freely. She spoke with gentle conviction. You were never alone in this, Grace. IVF failure is not shame. Many couples suffer, and sometimes the fault is not only the woman's. Her gaze hardened, as though seeing David in her mind. Grace inhaled deeply, as though breathing for the first time. The pieces of her broken life were slowly weaving into a new design. For hours they worked together. Miriam sketching organizational plans, Ruth arranging practical needs, Dr. Helen offering medical insight. Even Daniel Reed, the young law clerk, popped in with updates on confidentiality, reminding Grace, your ex-husband must never know about the inheritance, at least not yet. Night fell. Grace leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and fulfillment mingling in her chest. For the first time since the divorce, her house no longer felt empty. It buzzed with possibility, but as she stepped outside for air, her peace was pierced. Across the street, she saw Evelyn Scott, the gossiping neighbor, whispering with others. Their mocking voices carried, "Look at her! Pretending to rise again, she's still barren, still worthless. Grace's chest tightened, but this time she did not collapse. She straightened her shoulders, her aunt's letter tucked close to her heart. Yet while Grace fought to build quietly, miles away David Williams stood on a stage at a corporate gala, his arm wrapped proudly around Sophia. Cameras flashed as he declared, "My wife and I expect a child soon. The Williams legacy will thrive." The crowd erupted in applause. Grace didn't know it yet, but her ex-husband's arrogance was about to collide with betrayal he could not see coming. While Grace rebuilt in silence, David's pride and Sophia's schemes would soon spiral into dangerous games of power. Games that would shake the empire he thought was untouchable. The champagne sprayed into the air like fireworks. David Williams raised his glass high at the gala. Sophia Turner pressed tightly against his side. Cameras flashed from every angle as he shouted over the music, "To the future! My wife Sophia and I are expecting a child. The Williams name will live on." The crowd erupted with applause and cheers. Victor Brooks, David's flashy business partner, clapped him on the back, laughing loudly. "That's it, David. Finally on an air. Investors love good news. Your empire will only grow stronger now." But behind the applause, whispers stirred. Paul Stevens, David's ruthless competitor, stood in the corner with narrowed eyes. His lips curled into a thin smile as he murmured to an associate, "He's building his house on sand. And Sophia? She's more ambitious than loyal. Perfect." On stage, Sophia placed her hand delicately on her flat stomach, tilting her head to the side so the cameras captured her best angle. Her eyes sparkled, but not with love. Inside, she relished the spotlight, every cheer feeding her hunger for power. David kissed her cheek proudly, oblivious to the storm brewing behind her smile. Meanwhile, Grace sat quietly at her small desk miles away, finalizing her foundation's mission statement. Miriam James, her loyal friend, leaned over her shoulder, whispering encouragement. "While he flaunts, you're building. One day, they'll see the difference." Grace paused, her pen hovering. She hadn't heard about the gala yet, but she could feel it. A shift, a tightening in the air, as though David was pulling the world's eyes toward himself. For a moment, doubt flickered. What if they're right? What if I am nothing but his discarded shadow? But then she looked at the letter framed on her desk. Aunt Lillian's words, glowing like fire in her heart. "A woman's worth is not in her womb, but in her will." Grace exhaled slowly and pressed forward. Back at the gala, Victor Brooks leaned closer to David, lowering his voice. "Be careful, old friend. You've got contracts on the line, investors watching closely. Don't let anything shake their trust." But David only laughed, his pride swelling. "I have Sophia. I have an heir. What could possibly go wrong?" In the crowd, Paul Stevens smirked. He already knew the cracks in David's empire. Sophia herself was one of them. And later that night, as the gala lights dimmed, Sophia sat alone on the balcony with Lydia Harris, her cunning friend. Lydia's voice was low and sharp. "He thinks you love him. He thinks that baby is real. But you and I know better. You deserve more than David's crumbling empire. You could have it all, with the right man." Sophia's lips curved into a secret smile, her eyes glittering in the dark. "Maybe it's time I make a bigger move." Inside, David raised another glass to himself, drunk on applause, blind to the knife his mistress was already sharpening. Sophia's hunger would not stop at David's arm. With Lydia's whispers and Paul's schemes, she was about to begin a plot that could destroy the very empire David thought untouchable. The wine glass shattered against the marble floor. Sophia Turner hurled it across her penthouse living room, her chest rising and falling with fury. "He paraded me around like a trophy," she snapped to Lydia Harris, who lounged on the couch with a smug grin. "But all he talks about is legacy, 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 as if I exist only to carry his child." Lydia smirked, flipping her hair. "And the joke is, you're not even pregnant." Sophia's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "Exactly. And yet the whole city believes it. David believes it. I hold the power, Lydia. But why should I waste it on a man whose empire is already crumbling?" The doorbell chimed. Lydia opened it to reveal Paul Stevens, David's sharp-eyed rival, stepping in with a confident stride. He carried a folder of contracts under his arm, his smile like a blade. David is careless, Paul said smoothly, laying the papers on the table. His business is leaking from every corner. But with your help, Sophia, I can strip his contracts, his investors, his empire. You'll walk away wealthier than you ever dreamed. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. And in return, Paul chuckled darkly. In return, I watch him choke on his pride. You get your freedom and your fortune. For a moment, Sophia hesitated. David had been her ticket to wealth and status, but his arrogance was suffocating. Now, with Paul dangling promises and Lydia urging her on, the temptation grew irresistible. Later that week, another door opened, this time to Anthony Blake, a wealthy investor with a reputation for discarding women as easily as he collected them. He took Sophia's hand at a private dinner, his eyes sweeping over her like she was already his possession. David is small change compared to me, Anthony said, his voice dripping with confidence. I can give you more than money, influence, power, everything you've ever wanted. Sophia's heart pounded. She smiled, sipping her wine slowly. And what happens to David? Anthony smirked. He collapses, and when he does, you'll be standing on his ashes, with me. Sophia leaned back, her silk dress shimmering under the candlelight. In her mind, David was already falling, his empire already broken. She would not go down with him. She would rise higher. But as she whispered yes to Anthony's offer, her phone buzzed with a message. It was David. Sophia, come home. I need you tonight. The contracts are slipping. I can't lose you now. Sophia stared at the words, a laugh escaping her lips. The man who once sneered at Grace's tears was now drowning in fear. And he had no idea the woman he trusted was the one pulling him under. As David's empire began to crack, desperation would drive him back to Grace's door. Not for love, but for the wealth he suspected she might be hiding. The pounding on the door rattled the whole house. Grace froze in the hallway, clutching Aunt Lillian's letter to her chest. Ruth Miller hurried from the kitchen, her eyes narrowing at the sound. Don't answer, Grace. Whoever it is, they don't bring peace. But the pounding grew louder. Grace, open this door. That voice, her breath caught in her throat. David Williams. When she finally opened it, David stood there, his hair unkempt, his once polished suit wrinkled. His eyes darted nervously, but his mouth curved into a smile that did not reach them. Grace, he said, softening his voice, I just wanted to see you, to make sure you're okay. The lie dripped like poison. Grace's body stiffened, her knuckles white against the doorframe. You made sure I wasn't okay the moment you handed me those divorce papers. David stepped inside uninvited, his cologne masking the sweat of his fear. He looked around, scanning the house with hungry eyes. I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. We had good years, didn't we? Grace swallowed hard. She remembered the wedding vows, the nights of laughter before the IVF pain, the dreams they once shared. For a flicker of a moment, her heart twisted with old memories. But then the images of Sophia's hand in his father's cruel words, the courtroom humiliation, all of it flooded back. You didn't think of good years when you flaunted Sophia in front of the world, she whispered. David's smile faltered. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I just want to know you're okay, that you're managing. His eyes flicked to the unopened files on her desk. Tell me, Grace, how are you affording this new project? Her chest tightened. He didn't come for her heart. He came for her inheritance. Daniel Reed, the young law clerk, arrived just in time, carrying documents for Grace's foundation. His sharp eyes caught the tension instantly. He stepped between them. Mr. Williams, Daniel said firmly, Grace has no business with you anymore. If you have questions, direct them through legal channels. David's jaw clenched, his mask slipping. For a moment, the charm vanished and the bitterness returned. You think you're better than me now, Grace? You think you can rise without me? His words spat like venom. Grace's hands trembled, but she stood taller. I don't think, David. I know. The silence stretched until David let out a bitter laugh. He slammed the door behind him as he stormed out, the sound echoing through the house like thunder. Grace's knees weakened. But Miriam James, her loyal friend, caught her arm. "Don't break, Grace. That was not love returning. That was greed knocking." Grace pressed the letter to her chest again, her heart pounding. For the first time, she saw David for what he truly was. Not a husband, not even a man broken by loss, but a predator circling what he thought was still his. And outside in the shadows, Victor Brooks watched from his car, his phone glowing as he whispered to Paul Stevens, "It's true. Grace is hiding something. David was right to be suspicious." The whispers of Grace's secret were beginning to spread. Soon, David's allies and even his own blood would expose the cracks in his empire, and the law itself would begin to close in. The boardroom erupted in chaos. "Your accounts don't add up, David," shouted one of the investors, slamming a stack of papers on the glossy table. "Millions are missing." David's face turned crimson as murmurs spread across the room. Victor Brooks, the same partner who once clapped him on the back at Gallus, now leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You promised stability, David, but all I see is a sinking ship." David banged his fist on the table. "It's under control. My competitors are spreading lies." But his voice cracked, betraying his fear. In the shadows of the room, Paul Stevens smirked silently. The plan he and Sophia had set in motion was working. Contracts slipping, investors fleeing, doubt spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, miles away, Grace sat quietly at her kitchen table, sipping tea as Ruth folded laundry beside her. For once, the silence in her house felt peaceful, not oppressive. But that peace was fragile, because rumors had begun to creep into her neighborhood. Evelyn Scott, the neighbor with the sharp tongue, leaned over her fence to whisper to another, "They say David Williams is in trouble. His empire's collapsing. Maybe Grace knew something we didn't." Grace heard the whispers but chose not to answer. Instead, she returned to her blueprints, focusing on her foundation's launch. Yet deep down, she felt a strange tightening in her chest, as though David's downfall was not just his own, but somehow tied back to her as well. Back in the city, Deborah Clark, Grace's greedy cousin, entered David's office with false sympathy. "David, maybe I can help," she said sweetly. "Grace is hiding something. I can feel it. Let me talk to her." David's eyes narrowed. He had suspected as much since his visit to Grace's home. "Find out what she's keeping from me," he ordered coldly, "and you'll be rewarded." But even as he plotted, trouble arrived at his door. Inspector Adam Johnson, a tall man in a dark suit with a reputation for honesty, stepped into the boardroom with two officers at his side. His voice was calm but firm. "David Williams, we've received complaints of fraud and financial mismanagement. Consider yourself under investigation." Gas filled the room. Victor Brooks quietly slid his chair back, already preparing to distance himself. Paul Stevens smiled wider, his trap tightening. David tried to bluster, his hands shaking. "This is nonsense. My company is strong." But the eyes around the table told him the truth. No one believed him anymore. That night, Grace sat in her living room, holding Aunt Lillian's letter again. She whispered, "Am I watching justice begin?" For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that the man who had crushed her might finally face the weight of his own cruelty. But hope came with fear, because as David's empire cracked, his desperation would only grow, and desperate men were dangerous. As contracts collapse and the law digs deeper, David's carefully built empire is about to crumble, and with it, the last fragments of his pride. The courtroom doors burst open as reporters swarmed like vultures. "David Williams under investigation for fraud," they shouted, cameras flashing wildly. David shoved past them, sweat dripping down his temples, his once proud stride reduced to a frantic stumble. Inside, Judge Harrison banged his gavel, the same man who had finalized David's divorce from Grace months earlier. "Order! Order in the court!" His voice carried a heavy weight. "David Williams, due to evidence of financial misconduct, this court authorizes the freezing of all your assets pending investigation." The words dropped like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the room. Edward Williams, David's father, clutched his chest in disbelief. "This can't be happening," he whispered hoarsely. "My son, the Williams legacy." Victor Brooks, once David's cheerleader, quietly slipped out a side door, his phone already buzzing with new business opportunities elsewhere. He would not drown with a sinking ship. Paul Stevens, standing near the back, allowed himself the faintest of smiles. Every thread he had pulled with Sophia was unraveling perfectly. David slammed his fist on the bench, his voice breaking. "This is a setup. I built this empire with my own hands." But Inspector Adam Johnson stepped forward calmly, his badge glinting under the courtroom lights. "And now you'll answer for how you built it." Across town, Grace received the news from Miriam James. The headlines flashed across the small television in her kitchen. "Williams' empire in crisis, assets frozen." Grace stared at the screen, her heart conflicted. Part of her wanted to rejoice. Justice was finally reaching the man who had crushed her spirit. But another part trembled, because she knew David's pride would not let him fall quietly. She whispered to herself, "He'll come back. Not for me, but for what I carry." Her hand tightened on Aunt Lillian's letter. Meanwhile, Edward stormed into David's private office, his voice like thunder. "You let a woman destroy you." He spat the words with venom. "First Grace, now Sophia, and look at you, humiliated before the world. You are no son of mine." David dropped heavily into his chair, his face pale, his empire collapsing around him. Sophia was nowhere to be found. Her phone went unanswered, her seat at the boardroom empty. Panic clawed at his chest as realization dawned. Even she was slipping away. Judge Harrison's gavel echoed again, finalizing the asset freeze. Reporters rushed outside, feeding the city's hunger for scandal. And that night, in the dark silence of his mansion, David whispered into the emptiness, "I've lost everything." But he was wrong. He had not yet lost Sophia, and what she was about to do next would carve the deepest wound of all. As David's empire collapsed, Sophia's betrayal was about to cut deeper than any court ruling, and when she walked away, she wouldn't leave quietly. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. David stormed into his mansion, his tie torn loose, his face twisted with rage. "Sophia!" he roared. "Where are you?" But the silence that answered him was deafening. No footsteps, no sweet voice, no false promises, just emptiness. On the table lay a note scrawled in elegant handwriting. "David, you were never enough. Your empire is collapsing, and I will not sink with you. Anthony Blake offers me more than you ever could. Don't look for me. Don't call me. You're finished. Sophia." David's knees nearly buckled. His hands trembled as he crushed the paper in his fists. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She wouldn't, but she had." Miles away in Anthony Blake's glittering penthouse, Sophia Turner reclined on a velvet couch, a glass of champagne in her hand. Lydia Harris stood beside her, grinning like a cat who had cornered the mouse. "You've done it, Sophia. You've traded a sinking ship for a golden yacht." Sophia smirked, her eyes glistening under the crystal lights. "David was useful, but Anthony is destiny. I was never meant to play second to Grace, or to anyone." But as Anthony Blake entered the room, tall and cold-eyed, Sophia's smirk wavered. He kissed her hand lightly, but his words dripped with ice. "Don't get comfortable. Women come and go, Sophia. I don't keep broken toys for long." Sophia's chest tightened. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. Lydia noticed it and quickly looked away, sensing her friend's gilded escape might already be rotting from within. Back in the mansion, David sat alone in the dark, the crushed note still clutched in his hand. His mind spun with images, Sophia laughing at his side, Sophia whispering promises, Sophia walking away with Anthony. His pride shattered like glass, and outside, neighbors whispered again. Evelyn Scott stood at her gate, shaking her head. First Grace, now Sophia. He thought he was a king, but he's nothing now. Nothing. Even Gloria Hill, a notorious socialite who once envied Sophia's rise, laughed openly at the scandal. So much for the great Williams dynasty, she mocked at a dinner party. He was left by both women, one barren, the other greedy. But while the city mocked, Grace sat quietly in her home, her foundation plans complete, her dignity rising like dawn. Ruth smiled as she poured tea, murmuring, "See how the tables turn, Grace. You planted hope in silence, while they planted betrayal and pride. David buried his face in his hands, his voice breaking into the night. Grace, forgive me. I made a mistake. But the mistake was larger than he could imagine, and soon he would come crawling back to the woman he once destroyed. David's pride was shattered, Sophia was gone, and his empire was dust. But his path wasn't finished, because his knees would soon bend before Grace, and the world would witness her final triumph. The knock shook the house like thunder. Grace rose slowly from her chair, the sound of her foundation's opening ceremony still echoing in her ears. When she pulled the door open, she froze. There he was, David Williams. But not the man she once knew. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his once confident shoulders hunched in shame. He fell to his knees on the porch, clutching her hands with trembling fingers. Grace, he sobbed, his voice breaking. I was wrong. Forgive me. Take me back. Please. The sight was almost too much. Grace's heart clenched, her body shaking at the memory of his cruelty. She saw again the broken photo frames, the courtroom humiliation, Sophia's mocking smile, Edward's cold words. She remembered every wound he had carved into her soul. And yet she also saw the faces of the women her foundation would serve. Women mocked as barren, women abandoned, humiliated, and cast aside. She was no longer just Grace, the discarded wife. She was Grace, the voice for every broken woman. Her tears glistened, but her voice was steady. David, you divorced me when I was broken. You called me barren, a burden, a shame. You threw me away. And now you come back, not out of love, but because you've lost everything. David clutched her dress, his voice frantic. Please, Grace, I don't care about the money. I don't care about the empire. I just need you. But Grace's eyes narrowed. No, David, you cared for pride, power, and Sophia, and when they vanished, you remembered me. But I am not the woman you abandoned. I am stronger now, and I will never return. The door creaked as she stepped back, her dignity radiating like fire. Behind her, Miriam James, Ruth Miller, and Dr. Helen Carter stood silently, witnesses to her strength. Margaret Cole, her lawyer, nodded approvingly, while Daniel Reed placed a protective hand on her shoulder. David collapsed fully onto the porch, sobbing into his hands. Don't leave me like this. Grace's voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of thunder. I don't leave you, David. You left me long ago. She closed the door. Moments later, the city erupted with headlines. Grace Williams launches 30 million foundation for childless women. At the ceremony, Grace stood tall before the crowd, unveiling the foundation's emblem, the once empty cradle, repurposed as a symbol of dignity and rebirth. Pastor Samuel Green raised his hands, blessing her work. This is not barrenness. This is destiny fulfilled. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out the whispers of the past. Even Evelyn Scott, once a mocking neighbor, stood silent in awe. And somewhere in the crowd, Deborah Clark, Victor Brooks, and Edward Williams lowered their heads in shame as the truth became undeniable. The woman they had despised rose higher than them all. Grace smiled through tears, her heart steady, her aunt's words etched forever in her soul. A woman's worth is not in her womb, but in her will. The story closed, not with vengeance, but with dignity, not with bitterness, but with justice, not with shame, but with triumph. Because for every woman broken, humiliated, or cast aside, Grace's story was no longer just her own. It was a warning, a light, and a legacy that would echo far beyond David's fall.